Okay, so let's talk about how atoms react together, okay? So keep in mind that an atom is something that is always moving, all right? All the atoms that make up your matter, like your body or stuff, they're always moving, okay? They have their own kinetic energy and are moving constantly, okay? And they actually create sort of a heat from that kinetic energy. Okay, so when you take your temperature, that's what that is. The movement of all your atoms in you. Okay, so when atoms are moving around, they bump into each other. Okay, when they bump into each other, they have the opportunity to be able to react with themselves, react together. So there are two types of bonds. So two types of bonds, basically. So this first one we're going to talk about is an ionic bond. So what we have here is sodium. See sodium here, and we have chlorine here. And sodium, let's back up for just a second. An atom, again, is a nucleus with electrons around it. Okay? The electrons are set up in specific forms, okay? And they move around the nucleus in these little shells, okay? And there can only be a certain number in these shells. In the first shell, so here's the first shell, there's 2 electrons in that first shell. In the second shell, there's 8 electrons in that second shell. In the third shell, there still can only be 8 electrons. So the first shell of an atom is always no more than 2. 2. In the second one is 8. Third one, no more than 8. And fourth one, so on and so on, always the same. Okay, there's no more than 8. So an electron that is happy has a full outer shell. Okay, so if sodium has 3 shells here, of course 2 is in the first one, 8 is in the second one, and now the third one, it has 1 electron. Okay, so 8, 9, 10, 11. It is the 11th element on the periodic table. Chlorine has 2, of course, in its first one, 8 in its second one, it's full, that's 10, and then it has 7 in its outermost. Okay, so it's number 17. So this is number 11, this is number 17. So chlorine would really like to fill that outer shell. Sodium would like to kind of kick this one lonely electron here to the curb, okay? And it can do that. It can give this electron over to chlorine where it has a space. Chlorine really, really wants it. Sodium doesn't really need it. It doesn't really want it. So it literally will transfer this electron over to chlorine. Okay, so when that happens, now sodium has just given away a negative electron. So what happens to it? Does it stay neutral? No, it becomes positive. So this is sodium, and it becomes positive. Okay, because one of its electron just left. It's gone. It's gone over to chlorine. And chlorine took on that electron, which is negative, so it brought in another negative. So now it's a negative. So sodium is now positive. It's a positive ion, and chlorine is a negative ion. Sodium is the cation. Chlorine is the anion. So when this happens, though, positives and negatives like to stick together. So they do that. They stick together like little magnets, and they form salts. Okay, so ionic bonds between elements, not including oxygen or hydrogen, will form salts. Okay, the next type of bond is a covalent bond. And this one's different in that it doesn't just hand over, one element doesn't just hand over an electron to another one. They both need those electrons, so they share them. All right, so these two atoms, these are both oxygen. Okay, oxygen is number 6, so it has 6 electrons in its outer shell. It needs 2. So it can kind of combine and share 2 of its electrons. Okay, and I'm sorry, oxygen is 8. There are 6 electrons in its outer shell. Excuse me, I always forget about the second one. There is a second shell here that has 2. Okay, there is a second shell there. So this shell here outside has 6, so it's going to share its electrons and form a complete outer shell. But the outer shell isn't complete all the time. They share those electrons. So if I have my oxygen here and my oxygen here, and I've got my 2 electrons here, they're spending time on each oxygen. They're sharing them. Sometimes it's over here, sometimes it's over here, and so on. Okay, so that is sharing. All right. There are 2 types of covalent bonds, and we're going to talk about that in the next section when we talk about water.